When an avoidant and you stop contacting each other, this happens next. You know that moment after you finally stop reaching out, when your messages go unanswered and you think, that's it, I'm done. You expect silence to hurt them as much as it hurts you. But what actually happens next might surprise you. And it's not what you think. When you stop contacting an avoidant person, someone who pulls away when things get close, you're not just cutting communication. You're changing the entire emotional dynamic between you. Avoidant people often crave connection but fear losing control. They pull back not because they don't care, but because closeness feels like pressure. When you keep chasing, it confirms their fear that love means losing their independence. But when you stop chasing, something shifts. At first, they might feel relief. Finally, the space I needed. But soon after, that silence starts to echo. Because space doesn't feel peaceful when there's no one on the other side waiting anymore. That's when the avoidant begins to notice the difference between freedom and loss. Here's the truth. Your silence isn't punishment. It's clarity. It shows them what connection feels like without your effort. And it gives you something even more powerful, your peace back. This isn't about winning or making them come back. It's about breaking the pattern that's kept you emotionally hostage. Because when you stop trying to prove your worth to someone who's unsure about their own feelings, you rediscover something essential. You were always enough. They just weren't ready to meet you there. When you stop reaching out to an avoidant person, something fundamental changes in the dynamic between you. Until that moment, the connection has likely revolved around a chase, you trying to pull them closer, and them instinctively stepping back. It's not that they don't have feelings, it's that closeness triggers something uncomfortable in them. Your consistent effort, your texts, your check-ins, even your attempts to understand what went wrong, all of that keeps the invisible string between you taut. Every time you reach out, you confirm that you're still there, still waiting, still willing to bridge the distance. And as long as that remains true, the avoidant person doesn't have to confront the fear of losing you, because in their mind, you've made it clear that no matter how far they pull away, you'll find a way to close the gap. But the moment you stop contacting them, that entire pattern breaks. There's no longer a pursuer and a distancer. There's just silence, an unfamiliar, uncomfortable kind of quiet that neither of you can control. For the avoidant, that silence is both a relief and a disruption. Relief because the pressure to respond or engage disappears. Disruption because the predictable rhythm of being pursued is suddenly gone. They've grown used to you being the one to keep the emotional current flowing, and without that, they're left in still water. It doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like emptiness. What happens next is subtle but powerful. The avoidant begins to feel the shift internally. At first, they might rationalize it. They're probably just busy, or this is better for both of us. But over time, that story weakens. The silence doesn't fade, it expands. The lack of contact forces them to sit with the reality that maybe, for the first time, you're not going to fix this for them. You're not going to make it easier for them to come back. The absence of your effort highlights the space they've created, and they have to feel it fully now, not as relief, but as consequence. For you, that same silence begins to act like a mirror. You start to see how much energy you've spent trying to keep the connection alive. You notice how much peace you gave away just to maintain a sense of closeness with someone who wasn't ready to match it. By not reaching out, you reclaim that energy, even if at first it feels strange or painful. You're teaching your nervous system that you don't need to chase safety anymore. You're letting the relationship breathe without your constant intervention. And in doing so, you're allowing the truth of it to reveal itself. Because when the chase stops, the dynamic resets. The roles dissolve. What's left is a chance for reality to surface, whether they step forward or not, whether you decide to open that door again or finally close it for good. When you stop contacting an avoidant person, the first thing that often happens is an emotional sigh of relief on their end. It's not because they didn't care about you. It's because distance feels like safety to them. The space you've created takes the pressure off. They can breathe again. The tension that builds when someone is emotionally close begins to ease. And for a while, that space feels comfortable. They might even convince themselves that this is what they wanted all along, that things are finally calm, uncomplicated, drama-free. But this initial calm isn't peace. It's avoidance disguised as control. The quiet doesn't stay quiet forever, because eventually the silence starts to echo. When someone avoids intimacy, what they're really avoiding is vulnerability, the risk of being seen, of needing someone, of being hurt. Your absence starts to confront them with those exact fears. Without your messages, your reassurance, or your warmth, they no longer have a buffer between themselves and their emotions. The relief that once felt liberating begins to transform into something heavier. There's a subtle shift, almost imperceptible at first, when they start to notice the difference between being alone and being without you. The two are not the same. Being alone can feel peaceful when it's chosen, but being without someone who made you feel cared for, that begins to feel like loss. This is the point where realization starts to creep in, often in quiet, unguarded moments. Maybe it's when they scroll through their phone and notice there are no new notifications from you. Maybe it's when they pass a place that reminds them of a conversation, a laugh, a moment you shared. That's when their emotional distance begins to feel like disconnection. The thing they thought they wanted, space, now starts to feel different, heavier, lonelier. It's not dramatic, it's slow and subtle, but it builds. They might not rush back or suddenly express regret, because avoidant individuals don't process emotions that way. Instead, they sit with that discomfort, often without knowing how to name it. For the avoidant, that realization is both confusing and revealing. They begin to see that your presence wasn't suffocating. It was stabilizing. What they thought was pressure was actually care. What they labeled as intensity was connection. The absence of your energy makes that clear. The quiet you leave behind isn't just the end of communication. It's the beginning of awareness. It shows them what it feels like when effort, warmth, and understanding are no longer being offered to them unconditionally. Meanwhile, this shift also teaches you something profound. You start to see that your silence carries weight, not as manipulation, but as truth. You're not punishing anyone. You're allowing the reality of your absence to be felt. And in doing so, you create the exact condition under which an avoidant person might finally begin to confront their own emotional patterns. What once felt like freedom to them slowly becomes an invitation to introspection. When you stop contacting an avoidant person, something powerful happens. You begin to reclaim your emotional power. Up until that point, much of your energy has likely been invested in trying to keep the connection alive, in trying to fix the silence, or in analyzing every small sign of interest or withdrawal. You've been responding to their distance by moving closer, trying to bridge the gap with effort, compassion, and understanding. But what that often does is create an imbalance where your emotional state becomes dependent on their engagement. Your sense of peace starts to live in their hands, and that's an exhausting way to love. The moment you stop chasing, though, the control begins to shift. You take back something you may not have realized you gave away, your sense of self in the relationship. This shift isn't about pride or games, it's about emotional alignment. When you stop reaching out, you send a quiet but strong message. Your peace matters more than their inconsistency. It's not a declaration of superiority, but of self-respect. For the first time, you're not reacting to their avoidance. You're choosing your own boundary. That choice breaks a pattern that might have been running on autopilot for a long time. Every time you tried to re-establish connection in the past, you were reinforcing the idea that their withdrawal had the power to dictate your emotional world. But silence reclaims that power. It says, I am no longer available to this cycle. And that statement, even if never spoken aloud, begins to change how you feel about yourself. At first, this new space can feel unsettling. You might catch yourself wanting to reach out, wanting to explain, wanting to check if they miss you. That's because your nervous system has been trained to equate action with safety. But as time passes, you start to feel a different kind of security. One that doesn't depend on anyone else's response. You start to realize that your worth doesn't increase when someone validates it, and it doesn't disappear when someone withdraws. That's when you begin to feel emotionally grounded again. You no longer need their attention to feel stable. Your stability comes from the decision to prioritize yourself. For the avoidant, this change doesn't go unnoticed. When you stop seeking reassurance, it creates an energetic void, the same void that your efforts once filled. They may feel it as confusion or curiosity at first, but beneath that is a deeper awareness. The dynamic has changed. They can no longer rely on your consistent pursuit to soothe their fears of closeness. This shift can make them uncomfortable, but it can also spark reflection. Without realizing it, your choice to reclaim your peace forces them to confront what they've been avoiding, both emotionally and relationally. Taking back your emotional power isn't about control. It's about returning home to yourself. It's the moment when you remember that love should feel mutual, not managed. By no longer overextending yourself, you stop trying to earn the affection that should have been freely given. When you stop reaching out to an avoidant person, something very revealing begins to unfold. Without your constant effort, the truth of the connection starts to surface. For so long, your energy may have been holding the relationship together. Your texts, your understanding, your attempts to fix misunderstandings, and your willingness to keep the door open even when they kept stepping back. It's easy to mistake that effort for progress, to believe that the relationship is mutual because moments of closeness sometimes appear between the stretches of distance. But when your side of the effort goes quiet, reality has space to show itself. Without your emotional labor, the connection either stands on its own or begins to fade. And that's where you finally see what was really being built. Partnership or dependency, love or longing, reciprocity or imbalance. An avoidant person often confuses attention with pressure. When you are always reaching out, they never need to ask themselves what they actually want because your effort fills that space for them. The moment that effort disappears, they are left face to face with their own intentions. Do they care enough to reach back? Do they feel the loss enough to confront their discomfort and take a step forward? Or do they retreat further into silence, relieved that you've made the decision for them? Their response tells you everything. It doesn't come from words or promises. It comes from the absence of your effort and what they choose to do with that absence. This is why distance is so clarifying. When you're constantly giving, it's hard to see who's truly showing up. The lines blur between what you're creating and what they're contributing. But silence draws those lines sharply. If they reach out, if they initiate, if they begin to meet you halfway, that's not manipulation. It's their realization that connection requires participation. But if they remain distant, that's not rejection of you. It's simply the truth that their capacity for closeness isn't ready to match yours. Either way, you get information, not assumptions, not hope, but clarity. You begin to understand whether the bond was sustained by mutual investment or by your own persistence. This exposure can be painful because it dissolves the illusion that love alone is enough. It's not a punishment to stop trying, it's a test of reality. When you stop making the relationship work single-handedly, you're no longer propping up a version of it that only existed through your effort. You begin to see who they are without your influence, and perhaps more importantly, who you are without the constant striving. The silence reveals the truth that words and gestures often hide. Whether the relationship has real depth, or if it was a one-sided dance you were leading all along. In that honesty, however difficult, lies your freedom, because truth is always kinder than self-deception, even when it hurts. When you finally create distance from an avoidant person, something transformative begins. Healing. It's not an instant or dramatic change, but a slow, quiet unfolding that starts the moment you stop trying to manage both your emotions and theirs. For a long time, your energy may have been focused outward, trying to understand them, trying to make things work, trying to decode their behavior, or trying to prove that your love was safe and trustworthy. All of that effort leaves little space for your own emotional recovery. The distance you create, even though it might feel empty at first, becomes the very space where healing can take root. Without the constant cycle of anxiety, withdrawal, and hope, your nervous system begins to settle. You start to remember what calm feels like, what peace feels like, and what it's like to not live in anticipation of someone else's response. In that silence, you begin to see how much of yourself you had been giving away. You notice the ways you overextended to maintain closeness, how often you silenced your needs to keep the connection from breaking, and how you confused their distance for something you needed to fix. Healing starts as you bring that awareness into the light. It's not about blaming them or labeling them as the problem. It's about acknowledging that your peace was constantly interrupted by trying to hold together something that needed two people, not one. The space allows you to reclaim your emotional rhythm, to sleep better, to think more clearly, to feel your feelings without rushing to hide them behind someone else's behavior. Over time, the intensity of the attachment begins to shift. You no longer wake up wondering if they'll message you or feel the same sting when they don't. That's not because you've stopped caring. It's because your sense of self is slowly untangling from theirs. You begin to recognize that love doesn't mean losing yourself to keep someone else comfortable. You start to find fulfillment in your own energy again, in your hobbies, your connections, your solitude. This is the kind of healing that builds strength from within, not from external validation, but from internal alignment. The space you created isn't a wall. It's a boundary that protects your heart while it learns to beat calmly again. For the avoidant person, the distance can also become a mirror. It gives them the opportunity to sit with the consequences of their emotional patterns, though not all will take that opportunity. Some will use the silence to reflect, realizing the value of what was lost. Others will retreat further into avoidance. But either way, the growth that happens in the space isn't yours to control. It's theirs to choose. Your focus shifts from waiting for change to becoming the change. Healing, in this context, is not just moving on. It's moving inward, finding stability where there was once only reaction, and learning that peace doesn't come from being chosen. It comes from choosing yourself. When the communication finally stops between you and an avoidant person, it might feel like the end of something meaningful, and in many ways it is. But endings often carry hidden beginnings. What you thought was silence is actually space. Space for truth, space for clarity, and space for healing. The moment you stop chasing, explaining, or waiting for someone to meet you halfway, you begin to reconnect with the part of yourself that you may have lost in the process of holding on. This silence reveals so much more than words ever could. It shows you who they are without your effort and who you are without their avoidance. It shows whether the connection can stand on its own or if it only survived because you kept it alive. And perhaps most importantly, it reminds you that your peace, your worth, and your emotional balance are not dependent on anyone else's readiness to love you the way you deserve. You see, what happens after no contact isn't just about whether they miss you or come back. It's about what you rediscover in yourself when you stop making someone else the center of your emotional world. It's about realizing that your value doesn't decrease because someone couldn't meet it. It simply shines brighter in the space where confusion used to live. Sometimes the quiet that follows is painful, but in that quiet, you start to hear your own voice again, stronger, clearer, and no longer apologizing for wanting love that feels safe and mutual. So if you've stopped contacting an avoidant person, remember, you haven't lost control. You've taken it back. You haven't given up. You've chosen peace. What comes next isn't about what they'll do. It's about what you'll become. Healing isn't about forgetting them. It's about remembering yourself. And that's the most powerful shift of all. Thank you so much for listening, for reflecting, and for having the courage to face something so many people struggle with in silence. If this message reached you at the right time, take a moment to honor that, because it means you're growing. Remember, distance doesn't always mean disconnection. Sometimes it's the first step toward truly reconnecting with yourself. Take care of your heart, be patient with your healing, and keep choosing peace even when it's quiet. Thank you for your time, your openness, and your trust in this journey. Until next time, take care of yourself, because that's where real love begins.